Dr. Joanne Tippett is a lecturer in spatial planning in the School of Environment and Development at the University of Manchester, and the founder of Ketso, now a social enterprise.
Ketso is a hands-on kit for creative group work. It's a workshop in a bag. It's a way of making it easier to run a good workshop, to engage people. Basically, everybody has a pen, everybody has colored shapes, they can develop their ideas, and they can build them up and see the group picture developing. You can move the shapes around, you can start to see connections and patterns, and each of the bits is washable, reusable, it's lightweight, you fold it up, you can take it back, you can analyze it, and you can keep reusing it. Ketso means, literally, action in Lesotho, which is where I invented the kit. So it means action. It's so appropriate because Ketso is about action. It's about active learning, active engagement, turning ideas to action. And Ketso was the name we came up with to link back to the history of the product and also to link back to the idea of where it came from. The other thing with Ketso is it was the last NGO that I worked with in Lesotho, and that was Ketso Ayabua, Action Speaks. So it's a bit of just the story and the history of where it's come from. It's appropriate because the mission of Ketso is a worldwide, it has a global view. We want to improve people's lives, not just in England, but worldwide.
At the beginning, during the mid-1990s, after graduating from Lancaster University in ecological design, Joanne was working on a number of projects in Lesotho in southern Africa, where problems with clear communication were identified.
There were two problems. The first was the gulf between my green fire and enthusiasm for tree planting and water harvesting and people's reality, where they were coming from, their situation. And I needed to find a way to work with them so that to better understand what was important to them so we could better design a sustainable future. And the second one, this is really important, was that in mixed gender groups, women didn't speak, I found, and I wanted to find a way that everybody could have an input, whether they were male, female, literate, illiterate, depending on which language they spoke, because I had many different languages. I was working with people with many different languages, so I wanted to find a way for everybody's voice to be heard.
The solution was to come up with a way that would allow people to use materials that were to hand, sticks, stones and strips of paper, to make pictures to illustrate their thinking, a kind of movable mind map. This embryonic idea stayed with Joanne when she relocated to California in the late 90s. Joanne set about gaining more contacts in sustainable development communities by joining many groups in the Bay Area, eventually taking on a teaching role at Dominican University. This was a time when the movable mind maps idea came back into prominence.
I wanted a way that I could teach, and I was nervous about teaching at this point. I was quite young, I was still a bit inexperienced, and I was teaching at a university level. I wanted something that could make me look professional and give me something to do with the students, that I could draw out their ideas, but give the thinking some structure. So I came back to that movable mind mapping process and started to use that in my teaching.
In Africa, this movable mind map consisted of strips of paper along with sticks and stones. The kit needed to be more solid and look professional.
I went and talked to my dad, who has been in the textile industry all his life, and we started talking about how could I get colourful, movable pieces that would stick onto something. And he came up with the idea of using magnetic backing. So we had these large sheets of steel and laminated coloured pieces that we could move around.
In late 2000, Joanne returned to the UK to start a PhD exploring ideas using action research. As she described it, it works in practice. Does it work in theory? The project was jointly funded by the Mersey Basin Campaign and the Economic and Social Research Council, where it was necessary to facilitate interaction between key decision-makers and with members of the local community. This is where the kit came into its own.
The kit became fundamental to how I worked with the partners. I used this to work with community members and stakeholders to develop the plan for the whole of North Manchester and for the smaller landscape, Moston Vale, within that. So it was fundamental throughout the whole engagement process.
It was at this point that a further limitation with the kit became apparent: the lack of portability.
The kit was far too heavy. Moving large sheets of steel around wasn't really very practical for me to go from the university to North Manchester. So I went back to talk to my dad, and we came up with the idea of working with felt. So felt-based technology seemed rather more easier to use than steel.
The other key development, rather than using strips of paper or post-it notes, was the coloured leaves, originally handmade and painted. The leaf colours are inspired by colour codes associated with de Bono's creative thinking techniques and asset-based community planning. The success of this approach gave Joanne a platform with which to take the research further again, with the funding of the Economic and Social Research Council in the form of a postdoctoral fellowship.
I applied for a postdoc with the ESRC, and I was fortunate enough to get one. And during that time, I started to be asked to run more and more workshops, which was great, so exciting for me. And this partly came because the project that I developed during my PhD actually ended up getting £1.7 million worth of funding and got implemented. So people were quite pleased, really, because this project's happened. There's now a landscape in North Manchester which is regenerated based on that community plan.
By 2005, the reputation of Joanne's methodology of stakeholder engagement in community-based planning was leading to more requests to run and facilitate workshops in a broader context. This led to the idea that this could become a business, perhaps to be used by a wider audience.
I had an epiphany when I was sitting in a poorly facilitated workshop, and obviously I won't want to mention any names, but I was sitting there and I was quite bored, and I suddenly thought, if only we had my toolkit here, this would be so much better. Everybody would be engaged, people would actually have their ideas on the table instead of sitting and waiting for them to be written up on the flip chart. And it suddenly occurred to me that this kit could be used for any time people got together to think of ideas, to communicate, to learn or develop new thinking. Before then, I'd seen it as something that you used in sustainability planning. It was very much from my passion about working with the environment and people. And I had this sudden realization that this was a product that almost anybody could use and it could make workshops run better.
The kit was still quite heavy at this point and could only be transported around in a cart, requiring some commitment on the part of the facilitator. A redesign was needed to take the kit to the next stage of development.
Well, two things for Ketso happened when I got my academic post. One was I actually started using it in my teaching. So again, I think there's that element of, it's really, really nerve-wracking when you first start teaching. And I wanted to do something a bit more creative and engaging than just stand up and give a lecture. So I got the kits out in the lecture halls and got the students to use the leaves to say what they thought they would learn, what they knew about the subject. I used it for a review, which is always very revealing when students realize what they don't know about certain topics, especially just before an exam. So I used Ketso in my teaching, and that helped me extend my thinking about how it could be used and where it could be used. And the other key thing was that I applied for some research funding with the Environment Agency, so an earlier partner, and was asked at about the same time to run a workshop for the Green City Network launch. And I put the two together into an action research project where I could look at using the kit within the launch and work with a small group of people to see how they could learn to use the kit and actually learn to do facilitation.
The next challenge was one of scale, a facilitated event for the Green City Network, with a group of 150 people in the City of Manchester Stadium.
We didn't have enough kit. We just literally had to make thousands of leaves within a few weeks. Finally got the idea of using craft paper that we'd cut, and then we had to make the thousands of leaves. So we moved into the flat. Anybody who got near me in those weeks got given a pair of scissors, and we cut out thousands and thousands of leaves.
Commercialisation of the idea behind Ketso came a step closer when the managing agents for intellectual property at the University of Manchester encouraged Joanne to enter a business plan competition hosted by Research Councils UK. This opened up opportunities to get some training in starting and running a business.
Key things I learned was about marketing and finance, so taking it a bit away from just enthusiasm, I've got this fantastic product and isn't it exciting and wonderful to use, into how do I turn this into a business? How do I actually understand who to market this to, what messages to use, how I can actually get this into the market and develop it as a business, not just as a great idea.
There was always an inherent element of addressing social problems by using the kit, but it was time to really set out what made this venture a social enterprise.
We thought of Ketso from the beginning as a social product because it's used in learning, it's used in creativity, it's used to help people have a voice. But we also were committed from the beginning to any time that the product's made to actually start to think through how can we benefit disadvantaged people in the production. So we were really thinking, if we're making, we started to look at suppliers and to think through how could we actually use suppliers in the third world who were ethical trading or fair trade. How could we, through the supply chain, actually provide jobs to disadvantaged people? And that thinking was nascent within that early business plan.
A further consideration was to establish an appropriate legal form for the enterprise.
Thinking of legal forms, I wanted to develop a legal structure that locked in some of the social mission of what we wanted to do. So locked in the idea that you wouldn't always go for the cheapest option, you'd actually be providing jobs for disadvantaged people through the supply chain. That locked in the idea of a profit share for the sustainability type work and the open source development of thinking and ways of using Ketso, and that really helped us to further that social mission of promoting and transforming the way we communicate, collaborate and learn worldwide. So I wanted something that locked that social mission but kept a certain degree of flexibility so we could respond to opportunities, so we could actually act like an enterprise, we could be business-like and we could grow quickly, and that might still be attractive to investors because we knew we would need investment to scale. So I was looking for something that provided that flexibility but certain lock-in. I considered a community interest company, and that's a fairly new legal form that's been developed in the UK to provide an asset lock, so a way of saying if you've got assets, if you've got something in the company that can only be used for the social good over time, and it's somewhere between a charity and a company. I considered a charity with a trading arm, and to see how that would work. That didn't seem to have quite the flexibility that we wanted because you get very much more tied into the charitable mission and it would be harder to respond to different opportunities. We considered a limited liability company with the social mission just written into the articles, and then we considered a hybrid where we'd set up a community interest company and a limited liability company and actually have the community interest company own a golden share in the limited liability company so that it could actually had some say over major decision making and could also potentially get some of the dividend and profit from the limited liability company.
At the start of 2010, the vision for Ketso was re-evaluated.
The beginning of 2010, my vision for Ketso was that it would be a worldwide brand. There would be Ketsos in schools, boardrooms, meeting rooms, community halls worldwide. So really ubiquitous. It is out there as a possibility for how people can get together and work together. That its social mission to transform the way we communicate, collaborate and learn is actually active, it's happening. People are using this, they're being more creative, they're talking to each other more, we're learning from each other. So the vision is, it's worldwide, it's out there, it's making significant profit, enough profit that it's actually being able to fund the open source development of further ideas and thinking and ways to work with different community groups or to develop new creative projects, and we're coordinating and developing that and sharing that information with people, and we're able to fund sustainability ideas and thinking and training and projects. So there's significant profit to do the good work and the ideas and the things I've been driven by all along, and the research around it, because I'm academic at heart really, but I think we need to know, how does this work? What is the impact of all of this work? So there's the kit's out there, it's ubiquitous, it's a recognized brand name. I mean, it's like a Hoover. So shall I Hoover? Shall we get the Ketso out? Shall we do a Ketso session? And there's significant profit, and lots of people are making a living from the manufacture of this kit.